So Dale's the map man. He can tell you everything. But I'm with you. I would stay off of 85.
It's just horrible.
Dale and Dale has to go home to Charlotte and Lake Norman, and he gets on 85, and Dale, it's at least 1 out of 4 times you just stop dead, don't you?
Just parking lot. Just get out and walk around, call Steve, see what's going on.
Yeah.
It's just miserable. And I'm
It's
like,
miserable.
how much of 85 can I possibly humanly avoid? And if I can avoid the whole thing, I would be golden.
See, the bad thing for Dale and me is that we being senior citizens have to and you just kind of sit there and you're stuck because there's no getting off. You're stuck. And it's so he has to do without drinking a Diet Coke from like 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And as soon as he gets home, he opens it up.
Exactly right.
So Elena, I talked about you today, or not today. The day before yesterday. When was it? Saturday morning. I talked about you to your friend of mine, Adrian Dula, and she says she runs into you from time to time. So we had a good time talking about you. They're populating, Dale. We're all getting together.
They're coming in here.
Did North Carolina schools have were they in school today for election day? Okay. We were not. We our schedule gave us today off. So I was just curious.
Yeah, we can't stop for something as insignificant as an election. We got to go. We got to have school.
You know, one of the real challenges in North Carolina, Veterans Day is a holiday, and you can't go to school. It's the only day on the calendar that you cannot go to school. There's no law against Christmas. There's no law against Sundays. There's no law against anything other than Veterans Day.
It is not a holiday in South Carolina.
Right.
So
you've got all of these challenges of here's election day, then Veterans Day, then Thanksgiving, and it's you can't get into a routine because you're always having another day that you need to be not in school. I fully understand the election day thing, and but I'll also say that with early voting now, it's really not a need because you can go vote anytime, and so
I think a lot of South Carolina schools are still used as voting locations, and
that's what my board in Wilkes
safety. Yeah,
my board in Wilkes was big on that, and I mean, I understand the safety thing. It's I don't know. You're going to have traffic for sure, but if you can do a separate building for the voting piece, then it works pretty well. And that's not always possible. But anyway, that was a heavy debate back in the day. Do you take election day off?
Looking at test scores, we got to start going to school on Saturday. As bad as scores are now. I mean, we're going to have to do something to catch up. I mean,
I think we're going to have to go 200 days a year.
I mean, we're behind. I mean, folks, it's not good. It is not good. And so we're going to have to start making some decisions. Now, one of the things we talk about master schedules and days and length of time. You know, the state board sets and the General Assembly sets those policies on how many days, how many hours, and those things. But I would look to locals to start advocating. If they aren't going to move soon, I would look for locals to start advocating. Now, I'll talk about, and Steve can explain it. You know, when you're looking to do a master schedule, and that's basically what, you know, that's kind of the culmination of the OMA and what we did the second half of the semester. And you know, you look at your federal laws, all your federal programs, we know what all those are, you know, Title I, ESL, gifted, 504, exceptional children, CTE programs. But the second is we look at all those your state law on those things. Now, I'll let Steve talk about it, but Steve, when you were in Wilkes, you did something a little bit different in terms of the number of days. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, for the North Carolina people, as you know, the law now is that, well, I don't really know what the law is now, but I think it changed. There's an or in there instead of an and. So it's 180 or 185 days.
185.
Or 1,025 hours. Is that it?
Yes, 1025.
Yeah. So Wilkes County is responsible for the or. And we did that in 2008 when Dale and I were talking about with y'all of challenges that school districts have. The 2008 economic crash was a huge one, and we had to figure out how we were going to keep people employed. So we did a pilot calendar of 162 days of school, and we went an extra hour every day. And where we saved money was that we then the TAs were paid for 9 months rather than 10 months. And then you would save on the other pieces with transportation and things. Now, transportation you save for 1 year, and then they readjust your allotment for that if you go less days. But we saved I don't know $3 or $4 million doing that, and but it was a political price because everybody said, well, they didn't cut teacher salaries, and they didn't cut administrator salaries, and they didn't cut superintendent salaries, but you cut the TA salaries. And I'm not the nicest guy in the world sometimes. And I say, well, we also, over these past several years, have agreed to pay for any teacher assistant who would go back to school to get their teaching license. We would pay for them to go back, which we did. And a lot of them took advantage of it. And I said, so if you chose not to go back to school and get your teaching license, don't come to me crying about us taking a month's salary from you. And so that made several editorial letters. But the whole thing is that we were approved for a pilot. And we kind of snuck it in under the radar a little bit. Mark Basnight was in charge of the Senate at that time. And so we snuck it into the budget bill. It was on page 37 of the budget bill, by the way. One single line to allow Wilkes County to pilot a 162-day calendar. And that's what it was. But we do an extra hour every day. And it worked. We did very well with it. And so that's why you now have the or, why you have some flexibility, is that because the calendar did kind of work, the legislation then changed to making it an or instead of an and for the number of days you go to school. So that was a long explanation.
But what's illustrative for our purposes is it's already been proven that you can go an extra hour every day. There is a precedent for that Wilkes County set some 14 years ago. And so I'm already hearing this blowback, well, we can't do that, or that's not possible, or it absolutely is. Steve is living proof that absolutely you can go an extra hour every day. That's what we ought to be. I mean, that ought to be happening in January, the second day of January. That's what ought to be happening. School districts ought to be planning for that now to try to do some catch up. Because again, what do we do in school? We teach kids. And we're all about achievement. And it's kind of an expensive daycare proposition. If all we're doing is daycare, then, there's a lot cheaper things than this. But if we're about learning, then we need to be advocating for that extra hour a day, which has been proven works, and can be done without significant turmoil, and that's what we ought to be doing. So what I want to do tonight, we're going to talk about sexual harassment. We're going to talk about the case that you were to read for that in your activities. But I want to go through, we've gone through our case studies, and we're going to be ready for those on Saturday. Everybody say, yeah, we're going to be ready for those on Saturday. We're going to be wide open on Saturday. We're going to have a good time on Saturday. So remember, we're going to go in rounds. We'll, the first group, everybody in the first round will do case 1, then everybody will do case 2 and 3 and 4. And we'll kind of, we'll give prizes and other things for people who, the best in each round. See how that goes. So I'm looking forward to that. So we've already covered over that. Has anybody had any questions on the format for Saturday? What we're going to do? We're just going to do case studies. Anybody have any questions? What they should have? Remember, you'll write your reflection afterward of the process, how your group got along, what you did. Did you share? Did you learn from one another? Those kinds of things. What'd you learn from the cases? Again, I would remind you on case 3. Don't get hung up on whatever their protected status is. You could substitute for gay, you could substitute exceptional children, second language, race, gender. You could substitute any of those things. It's about the law about protected classes is what we're talking about in case study 3. In case study 4, again, don't get hung up on that it's out of the country. Use your district's rules and procedures and policies for that one, and that one's going to be kind of a culmination of everything that we've talked about this semester. So anybody have any questions on case studies or what we're going to do on Saturday?
Yes, well, Dr. Lamb, so when you say protected groups, are you talking
Yes.
about 9?
Pardon?
You're talking Title 9 when you say protected?
Absolutely. Any
Okay.
protected group, any group that under the law of 1984 that has protected status. I mean, that's the piece that you should take away from that case study. Case study 3 is that any group, I mean, for this particular case study, Jimmy and Willie were gay. And the question is what do you do when you have a situation, when you have protected folks like that? It could be Title IX, it could be exceptional children, it could be English as second language. It doesn't matter what their protected status is. What are the rules when dealing with kids with protected status? That's what that case is really about. Well, the case opens up with, inaction by the school administration. They allowed Jimmy and Willie's public displays of affection to inflame the entire community. And then there was a FERPA issue when other parents came in and wanted to talk about Jimmy and Willie and their behavior. And then we got into, 14th Amendment, equal protection. That's what we're talking about, equal protection status. You get into that about Jimmy and Willie. Well, we'll just cancel the prom, or we won't let Jimmy and Willie come to the prom since they might get hurt. Somebody might do something, and that's heckler's veto, where you amend or take the rights of the victim and under the guise of protecting them. Where you, instead of dealing with the hecklers, the people who are threatening them, you punish the victim. So there's several facets to that case, but what I'm trying to get you to see is don't get hung up because they're gay. That's not the important piece. The important piece is their protected status, their equal protection under the law. That's the important piece. You're going to have, as we're going to see in our final case study, you're going to have parents today come charging in the building, want you to take exceptional kids out. Don't let them kids in my kids' class. They're keeping my kid from learning. You have a lot of regular ed parents now who object to the rights of exceptional children or English as second language kids. I mean, just fill in the blank. You're getting a lot of that now. And so this case should prepare you for dealing with the community or parents who come in and make unreasonable or illegal requests of you based on this kid's status. Because he's gay, I don't want him at the prom. Because he's exceptional, I don't want him, I don't want him in my kid's classroom. That's the whole thing is to teach you how to develop your legal argument and your responsibility to protect the rights of these students. That's the whole notion with that case study. That they're gay is immaterial. Probably not to them, but to everybody else it should be. All right, so that's the notion with that case study. Other questions about case studies? All right.
Well, I have one more, and I don't know where I got this from because it's been some time since I worked with it. I brought it in First Amendment too, like freedom of expression, like how they wanted to, like all of a sudden stop the diversity day. Like, does that fit? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, you've got there's always, speech is protected. And so, but now they can't. The notion on PDAs is you can't just single out gay folks and say, well, you can't you can't hold hands and kiss, but we're going to let heterosexual couples do that too. I mean, we're not limiting their speech. So that is a part of it. But part of it too is that how we got in this mess with Jimmy and Willie is that we did not stop their behaviors. Now, again, we can't just single out gay kids. Now, you heterosexual kids, you can do whatever you want, but you gay kids, y'all got to kind of keep it, on the down low. Well, no, all kids got to keep it on the down low. So it's not really a speech issue, but if you want to talk about First Amendment, then we would get into diversity days and those kinds of things. And there are rules on those. So yeah, that is protected speech as well, but they don't get to have a club just because they want one, or just, we're not just going to stop school for them. We wouldn't stop school for anything. I mean, we're not just going to let every group have their own day and stop school that day. Remember, Tinker versus Des Moines said there's, that some amount of disruption is normal, but it wasn't like we were walking out of class or holding demonstrations. The whole Tinker versus Des Moines, if you go back and read that, was wearing a black armband. That'd be like wearing a t-shirt today. Everybody wears t-shirts today. That's okay. But now we can't have, we're going to stop school and turn school out. We can't have that. That level of disruption is not allowable even under Tinker versus Des Moines. Tinker said you get due process right and some disruption, but you can do something like wear an armband because it's not stopping instruction. But we can't have walkouts. We can't just stop school days and start doing other things. We have to stick to the curriculum. But that's not amending their speech. But they can still be gay and they can still be boyfriend and boyfriend, but they can't be doing public displays of affection, because that is unacceptable. That is a violation of the rules of the school. We can't do that. Whether you're boy and girl or girl, boy, it doesn't matter. We don't allow that in school. And you got to know that too, that you have certain rights as an administrator to govern the behavior of the students in your building. That's a great question, Jessica, because that gets us back to what do we follow? The state says, here's the manual. These are the infractions. These are the behaviors that cannot be allowed. Since we're sending you 85% of what it takes to run a school, we're setting the parameters on what's acceptable in that school. And then the local develops the code of conduct and takes those state-defined behaviors that are not allowable and says, all right, local, you develop a code of conduct that says what the consequences are for these behaviors. But we're setting that these behaviors are not acceptable in the school building. So we go back to that state manual that defines these are unacceptable behaviors. These are unacceptable that you must report to law enforcement. And these are unacceptable, these violent ones that must be reported federally and count against your persistently dangerous calculation. So the state says, here are the things you can't do. Now, the state does not set what the consequences are for having done that. That's through the local. the local Board of Education adopts a code of conduct that says, if you do this, then that happens, we give you this. But the state says inappropriate or public display of affection is not allowable in school. Whether you're gay or straight doesn't matter. So that's not a speech issue either. That we're not inhibiting or prohibiting anybody's expression there. This is unacceptable behavior in school. It's not the club. Can't do that in school. That's the whole notion here. Is how this thing got out of control and got sideways was we let Jimmy and Willie get out of control and didn't amend their behavior to the point where it became a community outcry. But then on the other hand, when we have these irate parents coming in, we can't talk to them about Jimmy and Willie because of FERPA law. We can't be talking about somebody else's children. So the question that arose in last night's class is how do you deal with Jerry and his wife? Well, you don't. You just tell them that we're doing this, but we can't talk to you about what we do with these other children over here. That's federal law, and we're not going to violate that law no matter how mad you get. But in this case, in this particular case study, what lit this thing off was inactivity on the part of the administration, and then continued to still try to not deal with it. Just tell them, could you wait a while to be gay? Well, that doesn't work that way. This is not like other things in life that you can sublimate and wait till later. And so, and you can't say, in order to protect you, because these other people are threatening you, I'm going to punish you and not let you come to the prom. That is a 14th Amendment. That is a issue of equal treatment under the law, and that's heckler's veto. You need to read that one. Other questions that you have about the case studies? All right. Let's move on to our activities, and I want y'all to tell me, share with us some of the experiences that you had doing your activities this semester. So let's look at these. Locate copies of your crisis plans. How did that go in general?
I actually got to sit through the district. I forget what his title is. I know his name, but he came out to check all the black box, the plans and everything. So I actually got to sit with the principal in that meeting to hear, which they scored great, but it was interesting to see because at one point I used to be at that school, so I helped with that piece, but all the updates they've added to them with just the location of all of the cameras in the building. That was new to me this year. I hadn't seen it in the past. And he also was approved. Now they're going to install more cameras because they said your cafeteria is well covered, but the rest of your school isn't. So they're going to now install. So it was interesting to see the crisis plans really dig through and how they talked with them, but also how they wanted to support providing more assistance in there in the recommendation. So that was something really neat to see.
It was. Well, it wasn't Morgan Houchard, was it?
It wasn't. I think it was Blair Hall.
Okay.
And then I forget, an older gentleman came out as well, but I don't know his name.
And so there was a time when I taught this course a long time ago when about half of you would have said, well, we couldn't find ours, or if we found it, it was several years old. But unfortunately, this has become the 800-pound gorilla sitting on the couch is those safety and crisis plans now. They are a big thing. They matter. People spend money. There are people that are coming out and checking. They're just like Sarah said, your cameras aren't good enough. We're gonna fix that. I mean, this is a thing now. You got to be concerned, and that twice monthly going over that campus, you better not just phone that one in. I'm gonna tell you, if something goes wrong, you can't believe the scrutiny that you're gonna get nowadays. They're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. That campus better be as safe as you can possibly make it, and you better check it on a regular basis. You better know where all your evacuations are. You better have your class list updated. All of those kinds of things. You cannot assume that things are going to go well, and if they don't, that that everybody's going to look after you. They will not. You will be under the bus. You better know that. Anybody else have an experience they'd like to share with us when they went out and looked for their crisis plan or were involved in the crisis plan? Thank you, Sarah, for that. That's right on point in terms of how important they are now.
Blair Hall actually came probably the day after we looked. I mean, the day before we looked. And he left something at the school, so he came back to pick it up while she was showing me, the assistant principal, and we scored like a 100. It was her second year in a row scoring a 100 on the safety audit, which was very nice. And we had a few safety trainings because I go through the book bags in the morning. That's like my duty, which is like the most scariest thing ever, because I feel like I'm in charge of the school safety by randomly searching book bags and stuff. But anyways, it's the moment that I asked the AP for the information, she was like, "Oh, that's right here," and it was within reach.
Yes.
I was just like standing there in awe, because she went through every single thing in the black box. She was like, "Oh, and we need this because if we happen to have this and this happens here, then we go here and these are the people that we call." And then she shows me like this other thing that's in a Ziploc bag that's just so secure and only 2 people in the building know how to find it. And she tells me about the phone that it reminded me, when I thought about it, like a secret pathway to the president. Like he has one line, like a phone that nobody else can get to. And she was like, "Yeah, so our principal has this line." And then it's a call, I don't know if it's a red phone or a black phone, I don't know. But yeah, so I say all this to say, it made me feel really safe. But not knowing that as a teacher that we have all of these things, I feel like that's something that all the teachers should know about. What's in this black boxes? Who are the 2 people that are responsible for carrying this or doing XYZ to make sure that this side of the building is this. And one thing that was really concerning to me that Blair had mentioned while I was standing there was that our principal did not like it, but when we did our lockdown drill while he was there, he said that the principal, the AP, and the other assistant principal had to be locked in their office. And he was like, "I'm uncomfortable because I have to know where my staff is. I want to look and make sure everybody's where they should be if it's a real tragedy." He said, "No, your job is to be locked in this room and you can see everybody from these cameras." So knowing that made me feel like that's information that I know, but I feel like staff members should know that, because we go through these drills often once a month, but we don't know. I mean, we go and they, tug on the doors and make sure they're locked, make sure the blinds are down. But literally, we think about the savior of the building being the principal, making sure he's the one making the call. He's going to be tucked away, so, and we don't know everything that's in that black box, and we don't know who's responsible for doing what or getting who there. And I think that's something that should probably be shared with the entire staff. That was the only thing that I was like, we should kind of know this stuff. But doing this assignment was like really something that I felt like was an asset to me by knowing and being informed of the things that we should be responsible for.
Well, thank you, Shantae. Absolutely. When you notice when you turned yours in, that was the one thing that I responded back. I have some, standard kind of responses, and I try to personalize them, is that these things only work well if they're communicated and everybody knows what they are and what you're doing. Too many times we sit and somebody, over the summer, when we're doing all this stuff for the year, we sit and we have a group or 1 or 2 people or maybe 3 or 4 that'll sit and make this plan and update it. And then it goes in the box and nobody's not communicating. Nobody knows what's going on. If the principal's out of the building, at principal's meeting or wherever, and something goes wrong and the principal's not there, then nobody knows what to do. These plans are only effective if they're communicated. If you're the AP, just like Stephanie's AP now, if you're the AP in charge of this, I would have a point of privilege at a staff meeting at least once every semester, where I would say, "All right, folks, this is what we got. This is what we're doing. this is it. And I would spend 30 minutes at least twice a year. I would spend 30 minutes making sure that the faculty knew what we were doing and that it had been communicated, that we've been practicing it. You know, the worst thing you can do is, you know, why is it we always practice a fire drill, you know, at the best times instead of the worst times? We don't want to run fire drill while we're having lunch or when we're having zero period or club day schedule, or no, we can't do it then because, you know, people will be confused. Well, that's the time to do it, is when people would be confused or out of position, as we call it in sports. That's when you do these things, because you don't get to pick when you're going to have the crisis or the emergency. You don't, those kinds of things, you know. We had an active shooter one time when I was at principal's meeting at Staff Development Center over on West Boulevard. I got a call that said, we've got an active shooter. And I said, I'm heading that way. They said, don't bother. They've got the road blocked. You can't get in. What do you want us to do? I said, duck, stay low. That's about the best advice I can give you. You know, we've got a plan, put it in place. And so that absolutely happened to me. Absolutely. And so those plans are only good if they're communicated. Work that inventory. If you've got one for your district, make sure that happens. Now, I'm going to pick on Valine for the second half of this, where we talked about budgets, knowing all the different budget areas. You know, it doesn't matter what the 5 priority items is in budgeting at your school, as long as your principal has one. You know, my argument is budgets, local budgets need to support the school improvement plan. But your steps in budgeting, you know, those are all going to be pretty much the same, but you got to have them. You got to have a priority list. But what I'm going to pick on Valine is Valine, what's happened with the Booster Club at South Mecklenburg?
That's funny because I don't know if you noticed that they seem to have reopened that case recently. There was something over the news recently about it.
Oh yeah, it hit the news. It was all over the news all weekend in Charlotte.
So
it made 4 news cycles in a row. That means something's got to happen.
Yeah, something is happening. Something is happening. So we had people who we thought were responsible and honest to be in charge of the Booster Club. However, they were slowly taking money from the account for different purposes. One of the main things that came out was those gift cards. That gift card receiving, when you get those gift cards, what happens to the gift card? So through that, they were slowly taking money until, long and short of it, eventually they got caught. And when I was doing the interview with my principal, that point came up in the interview where tracking what people are doing in the organization is very important to the budget, and gift cards is something that is a big no-no, because that's one of the areas where people tend to not be able to account for where the money is going. Mm-hmm. So Salt Lake has been on the news because of this Booster Club for the last 2 years, and I don't think it's going away any soon.
No, it's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And so now some of the charges that you know that they wrote checks for, what they initially worked it around to where everybody in that family were the signatories on the checks, and there was nobody from the school was a signatory on the checks. Now, these checks weren't just written for gift cards, folks. They were written for, you know, entertainment and clubs and restaurants and personal expenses and those kinds of things. Now, you'd say, well, you know, how much money could it have been? Well, South Mecklenburg's Booster Club is quite wealthy. And so they've already identified over, let me hold your hat here, over $300,000 worth. Now, they haven't identified all of it yet, but that we're already over 300,000.
Yeah.
That's American dollars, 300,000 American dollars that they've already know that is gone. Now, they've not got to the bottom of it yet.
Yep.
But now, and this wasn't a hit and run. This was over a long period of time. This is, if you look up in the dictionary, failure to maintain fiscal control, it would have C South Mech underneath it, I'm afraid. This may be the worst one I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of bad ones. This one may be the worst one I've ever seen in terms of, if anybody had looked, I mean, it wasn't like that they were writing checks to places that you knew that had nothing to do with Booster Club business. They were writing personal bills. I mean, they were paying their power bill, the rent, the cable bill. I mean, they were just using it as a personal banking account, not for a minute or two either, for years, and nobody was watching. It only came to light when, when there was no money left.
The thing
When I
is,
say there was no money left, like $400. It was supposed to be like $500,000 in the account, and they had $400.
the thing is too, people tend not to pay attention to clubs in schools because they tend to be, they can be by themselves, operational by themselves, but that's where the money slowly creeps away from the school, money that should be used for internal areas where the district is not able to fund. And that's one of the things my principal was saying, because he took over after that happened, so he basically had to be cleaning. He's doing cleaning up.
Yeah,
He's doing
yeah,
cleaning up. Those who are looking on, if you don't know the track record, you would say, oh, it was this principal, but he's really the one that's cleaning up what had
yes,
happened.
yes. I would,
So
yeah, that's, remember I talked to you about when you become principal at a school, somebody will call you from the central office within 2 days of you arriving at that new school and say, hey, let's have lunch. Or can I come by and let's have lunch? It's always, let's have lunch. Well, maybe that's just me, because everybody knows it. You see me, you say, Dale loves to have lunch. Maybe that's just me. But what that is this is the illegal stuff that's going on in this school that's got to be fixed today. We're not going to blame you for it having happened, but we're going to blame you if you don't get it fixed. And it doesn't matter how many years it's been going on. I told you I had an English teacher that had been teaching photography, I think, for 6 years out of field, and been using an English position to pay the guy teaching photography. And when it got stopped in CTE, when the feds no longer paid for it, the school wanted to have it, they just took an English position. That's got stopped today. I too got in a situation at a junior high in Charlotte where one of the coaches had got control of the booster club and was driving the activity bus for his personal vehicle and spending all the money from the booster club. I had to clean that up first day. I mean, those are the kinds of things. Now, Valine is right. People think, well, what about the principal? Well, that's why they got a new principal. They tried to handle this kind of under wraps, but unfortunately, it didn't stay under wraps. These things never do. But that's why they've got a new principal. The last one, they moved out very quickly and quietly when this came to light. But yes, this principal is going to have a devil of a time cleaning it up. And it's going to stick to him because, just like Valine said, a lot of people in the community are going to think that he's responsible for this, or he's partially responsible or whatever. But, I can't tell you enough times. First thing you do when you become principal of a school, I don't care if you were AP there or if you were asked for an audit, immediately. Find out where the money is, where the money's gone, what's going on. Usually somebody will tell you, just like I'm sure they told Mark when he, that he knew why he was going there. But you've got to maintain fiscal control. You've got to know what each of those accounts can be spent on. If you're in a high school especially, and you've got booster club and band and those kind of choral accounts, you better keep an eye, you better know what's going on. You can delegate the activity of fundraising, but not the responsibility. That's what we're referring to here. That's the thing to remember about fundraising, which is the majority of how you generate money at your local school level is through fundraising. You can delegate the activity, but not the responsibility. Don't be one of those knucklehead principals that say, I don't have to worry about that. I just turned over the PTA. Well, what happens if they abscond with the money? And don't ever think that that won't happen. Just like Valine said, this was supposedly a pillar of the community family, but they weren't. Any closing thoughts, Valine?
One of the biggest takeaway in his meeting, just as you said, is making sure that that budget is monitored to the T.
Yes.
Monitored to the T, especially for those areas that we tend not to pay attention to, thinking that the people there are qualified and they're competent, but make sure it's monitored, because at the end of the day, as the principal, you are going to be solely in charge of whatever happens.
That
So
is correct.
monitor it to the T.
Dr. Laws?
Well, it's a fascinating thing. And again, Wilkes County is 10,000 students as opposed to what CMS has, but we determined that it was a good move on our part to go ahead and make all of the clubs and organizations a part of the audit. And you have the deep dive audit that the school district goes through, but there are simplified versions of audit.
Yes.
And these auditors are professional. They know exactly where to look and where to trace. And so it's a relatively inexpensive thing that will end up paying huge dividends for you because it keeps everybody on the straight and narrow. I don't know why more districts don't do that. I know that both districts where I went did not do that. And I left Elkin without having put it into place. So I'm not saying that I'm any less guilty than anybody else. This was 2003, but shortly after arriving in Wilkes, it made sense to get a hold of where is the money, and so I think that as a principal, I think you would do well to advocate for an internal auditor of some type, whether it's a district internal auditor or a firm that's going to do it, that all of these sources of funds are being audited and it kind of, one of the things that is challenging about our conversation is you listen to Dale talk about, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this. And at some point, it can be almost scary that I've got to have my thumb on all of these things, and there's just not enough time in the day. You think about everything that Dale talks about, or that I talked about the first half of the class, and we hadn't even got into teaching and learning, and that's our business. So it can be an awesome thought of, I've got to make sure I've got this covered. So that's again a roundabout way of saying I think that all principals ought to advocate for some kind of audit, particularly when you're new to the school, to get a handle of where it is. That way, if there's something amiss, that it won't come and be blamed on you. Again, I don't know who's at South Meck now, but that poor soul is going to get blamed. It doesn't matter whether she or he had anything to do with it, and because that's just how the community is. That's how social media is. That's how the media portrays it, and it'll end up being that the family who embezzled the money a little something wrong, but the principal's really the one ought to go to jail. That's
Yeah.
how it end up being portrayed, and so it's a very frustrating thing. And so yeah, I'm glad that Wilkes went that route. We did it early on. I think it was probably 18 months after I got there, and really it was because of concern. We were unable to. The principals were unable to track money from the booster organizations, and so I said, well, we'll fix that. So, and then there was uproar over that, by the way. You know, then the people in office for these booster organizations, you know, immediately say, well, you just don't trust us.
And
yeah,
your point is
that was I said, well, I trust you enough that if it comes back clean, I'm willing to say, woo, they have done a great job.
exactly. Yeah. Glad you
And
mean
in
it.
fact, we were able to do that, and that comforts the whole community.
Exactly.
When of course we weren't able to do it 100%. We had a couple that were a bit shady, but for the most part, everybody felt very good after it was over. But the officers were not happy that we put that into place.
Yeah, because it limits their flexibility in what they think is needed.
But you as a principal ought to be thrilled if somebody says we're going to audit your clubs and
Yes.
organizations and your local funds, by the way.
Yes.
You ought to be thrilled, because it is that piece that guarantees the community you are an upright, outstanding, honest, trustworthy leader.
You know,
That you have your thumb on everything.
yeah.
It is the best tool you can have.
Mm-hmm. That you are a you know, a financial steward, and that's what they're looking for.
Mhm.
All right, so let's talk about human resources. We talked about that a little last week, and
Can I say to Dr. Lamb?
yes,
One thing I like, and I don't know if this stemmed from the whole booster club thing, but one thing that the school has really been pushing for is every club that they're going to start. Any teacher wants to start a club or a group wants to start a club, they have to do a financial training. It's a must.
I think that's
That has been
absolutely
something that they have instilled. You have to go through. If you don't go through that financial training, you can't start a club.
well.
So I really admire that. So, and then there's a timeline that they have, a process that they have to go through, and they have to really
All right.
show that they have mastered that course in order for them to actually
Yeah, it's
do
a
any of
good
those
thing for
clubs or
them to
anything
learn
like
the
that.
purchase
I
order
think that's
system.
a plus, trying to move ahead of this whole thing, but
Yeah.
it's gonna take a while.
Yeah, it will. I mean, one of the things that you get into with these booster clubs or these organizations is they make financial commitments, and hope the money will come, or they make financial commitments knowing that the money won't come, but that you'll bail them out as the principal. And so you know, the modified accrual accounting system, you know, purchase order system, that they need to learn that and understand that you can't spend money without a purchase order, and that the purchase order has to be approved. That A, you got the money, and B, that the purchase is allowable with what you're doing. And so absolutely, I think that's a marvelous idea that, you know, we need for you to volunteer and help us with these organizations, but you've got to be financially responsible. You need the training. You won't get it by osmosis. You know, you're going to have to be trained. I think that's absolutely a marvelous thing to do, that you have to qualify to do these things. Absolutely. Good point. All right, let's talk about HR a little bit. We've talked about human resources. One of my students in my Monday night class, he's at a charter school. He's at Langtree. And for those of you who don't know, Langtree is actually just across the water in Iredell County. It's the first exit on 77. They put a new exit in for Lowe's, exit 31. The last exit in Mecklenburg County is 30 there at Davidson. 31 now is at Langtree. They built a new development there, and there's a new charter school there off Langtree Road, and he's there, and it's they're in their 10th year. It's an excellent building. It's a beautiful place. But they, just like many of us are having, many schools are having problems hiring people. And one of the things that Nate talked about last night is, talking with kids, is that they're having a lot of turnover. They're hiring people and then, shortcutting the system. They've just hired one, and within 2 months, they've had to let him go because they didn't bother to do the background check until after they'd already hired him. But one of the things that Nate was talking about is we look at this from an administrative point of view, and we see, we got to follow due process, and we got to hire these people, and it takes a while, and we're trying to shortcut it. But he said, what we don't understand is kids talk about that, and they're talking about the level of anxiety and uncertainty with that they're seeing with all these people coming and go, with all this turnover. And then when somebody just disappears, they wonder, was I safe with that person in the building? Or when you hire the next person, did they vet this person? Am I safe? Is this person going to do something bad to me? And you know how rumors just fly all over the building. And so the notion here with hiring is, whatever your role is in your district, and the process is pretty much the same, but who does each piece of it varies from district to district. Again, in Charlotte, somebody did it all for me. In Burke, nobody did anything for me. I'll just juxtapose those two districts. I had to do it all. I had to advertise. I had to vet go through all the applications, pick out the ones. I had to check on their licensure to make sure that they were certified. I had to do their references, had to do their background check, had to make sure they got their drug test, had to do it all, had to interview them. Charlotte didn't have to do any of that. But the important thing to remember is that you can't no matter how busy you are or what your obligation is, you must follow through with it. That's what Nate again was talking about last night. They've been shortcutting the system at charter school because they think that they don't have to follow the rules. Well, it's not just the rules, it's the culture. It has jumped up and bitten them with some bad hiring decisions that they've made. And now it has negatively impacted their school. Sometimes nobody is better than a bad body. I don't like that, but that's just the truth. And to conclude about personnel, before I go to Steve and let any of y'all talk about personnel, know what your employee benefits are, your compensation, your benefits, EAP assistance programs. I told you I got caught in that deal in Charlotte where I couldn't dismiss a teacher because she was under employee assistance for drug addiction, and I had to do a sub for 6 months. I couldn't even do a long-term sub because of her status. You need to know those kinds of things and who to refer teachers to when they have problems. I would advise you don't get involved in steps and years of experience and master's pay. Don't get involved in those. Make sure you refer those back to your human resources people. Steve, you have something you'd like to say about human resources?
Yeah, most districts have they handle it centrally on the hiring piece after the decision's been made at the school-based level. So the benefits and the salaries and all those things are handled centrally. What I want to emphasize here is that when you have an applicant and you are interviewing that person, if you listen to Dale's conversation about the charter school, but it could go with anybody, and everybody's going to list 3 references, right? Just about every application has a process of 3 references or so. So one of the things that ought to raise some eyebrow is if the candidate does not list their current supervisor. Now, there may be a reason. They may say, I'm just not ready for my supervisor to know. Even then, it needs to be made clear, if you are my choice, I am calling your supervisor. So you just need to know that. And because I'm going to tell you something, folks, that's how we get kind of hoodooed by some people. They can get 3 people who either are friends with them to say something good, or people who really don't know some of the shortcomings that they have because they have not observed it. So it is critical that you ultimately make sure that each candidate knows you are going to call the most immediate supervisor, the latest one they've had. The second thing is on the flip side. Friends, one of the things that we have destroyed ourselves with is telling sorry people, if you'll resign, I'll give you a good reference. And we have killed ourselves time and time again. And it's got to stop. I know that like it or not like it, the court system has put in all kinds of parameters of what you can and cannot say. But all of us are pretty good. You know, we talked about Maxwell and intuition, right? All of us are pretty good at being able to read between the lines. So when you're asking an immediate supervisor about the quality of performance from this particular employee, if their answer is he was employed here for the last 6 months, or he was employed here for the last 12 years, if that is the response and that is all that's said, you read between the lines. And that's what we've got to do a better job with. I understand that some are reluctant to say they don't come much worse than this person. I understand that, but you got to be able to read between the lines, and then please, just to get rid of somebody, don't give them a good reference when they're not a worthy recipient of that reference. So that's my 2 things.
Quick question. I remember like a couple years ago, I was just sitting in on a principals meeting and they were talking about that. And a few of them mentioned that they cannot give bad recommendations. So if someone called about me, they couldn't say anything negative about me. So hearing you say like read between the lines, yes, but is that true? Like they said they can't give negative, like they can't say anything bad about the applicants. So if somebody was asking, it's just like, oh yeah, they were employed here for 3 years. And if I just don't say anything else after that, then you would get the impression like, oh, they were employed. But I was told that they couldn't say anything negative.
That's not negative. If I said Shantae was employed here for 3 years, that's not negative.
No, and that's it. Like I can't be like, and she was late to work every day. She would do this. She never left lesson plans, but like you can't really say anything about the applicant. Is that true? Can principals not tell like y'all can't say that?
I think that we probably are a little bit too hesitant with the law to say things, but it would be safer just to do she was employed here for 3 years.
And that's it.
And that's it. Yeah.
Now, the question is, it comes back, but sometimes because you can doesn't mean you should. You absolutely can give somebody a negative review on a reference. Absolutely, you can do that. There's no law against it. But HR people always advise against doing that, in that you have to be able to prove what you say with objective data. And that's one of the things the HR folks don't want to be fighting those lawsuits and have those EEOC complaints against them all the time, because even if you win, it's quite expensive. And so the rule of thumb is don't say anything negative, because we don't want a lawsuit, even though you can prove it. Even if you can prove it, we don't want to have the expense of a lawsuit. But yes, you can give a negative reference. Yes, you can give a negative review. Yes, you can tell somebody that, it's a good thing that breathing's involuntary, or he'd have smothered to death. He was so lazy. Yes, you can say things like that. You absolutely can. But your HR folks don't want you to, because even if you win, it's still expensive to go to court. And,
Yeah.
and you know, you generally have to hire an outside firm to do that.
So you know, again, Shantae or anybody, when the reference call comes, and they say, was this person trustworthy? Were they reliable? Did they come to work every day? If it's yes, then they're gonna say yes. And if it's no, they're gonna say she worked here for 3 years.
Yeah.
And you understand that there's not a negative statement. They're not going to be able to go to court and say you lied about me. And that's what we've got to do a better job with. I think that's where your HR people and anybody else's are coming from. So I think that's probably the best way to dance around it. So when you're giving a good reference, then let it all out. Let them know everything good about them. And when you're not, then just answer that given line. And we need to be astute enough to know the difference.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you something, folks. This, if you will resign and I'll give you a good recommendation, it's got to stop.
Got to stop.
It needed to stop 50 years ago, but it's got to stop. That's how we got all of these. Man, what a mess.
Yeah. Now, full disclosure, I'm gonna say something as we move to the next phase here. I'm gonna say this. Now, full disclosure, Steve's a Lutheran, I'm a Baptist. But I'll just tell you right now, and I won't throw him under the bus with me. You can just run over me as a Baptist. If I see somebody's got their pastor as a reference, I will not hire them. Let me say that again. If I see somebody that's got their pastor as a reference, a professional reference, I will not hire them. It's been my experience, and it's only anecdotal. It's only my experience. It's been my experience that, you know, that they're getting somebody that's going to be an advocate for them, but that there's a reason why they don't have enough professional references. And that's one of those where my radar goes up immediately. Steve may think different than that, but I that's just one of those that, from my experience, that tells you what, that's that reading between the line. That tells you what you need to know. If you can't find 3 professional references, you got a problem. There's a reason why you can't find 3.
So in EDLS, our first class is the leadership class, strategic leadership, and we talk about this very thing with you know, this when you are in a leadership role, if board members are the worst, and they will attack you as a principal. They will come to your school and they'll tell you, you need to hire Ms. Jones because she is such a nice person. Everybody loves her. Everybody loves her. Can she teach? No, everybody loves her. She is the nicest person. Everybody in the community will think she's just the greatest thing here. She is just what this school needs. Can she teach? She is really nice. You remember the old Andy Griffith when they were setting up Gomer to date Barney's cousin?
Yeah.
And Gomer would say, "Is she pretty?" And they'd say, "She's nice. She's really nice." And well, is she pretty? She's nice. And it was the same idea. And so I'm glad you said that, Dale. That's exactly the way I feel about it. 3 professional references.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
you can't drop your standards there, folks. You got to have 3.
I understand that any one of you may not want to name your immediate supervisor as one of your references right now because of the uneasiness that they know now that you're looking. You may not want to do it. I just think that you, as the hiring manager, need to make sure they know I'm calling your immediate supervisor if you are my choice. Yeah. And so just know it.
Yeah. But
I would like to
I would like to ask about the survey references back at the when you were talking about not giving negative feedback as references, but when you do the surveys, do you think it's acceptable to do middle of the road or?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Apple track stuff and all that. Yeah. We get a lot. They'll get far more of these than I do.
I did one today.
Yeah, he could probably spend 2 hours a day just doing references for people. But yes, you can. I mean, I get them. But I will tell you, I think both Dale and I are at a point where, you know, if it's a student that we question in a particular role, doesn't mean they're again a bad employee. They just might not be good for that particular role. We'll just call the student and say, I'm not sure you want to use me for this.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to lie. So, but I think Stephanie, you're exactly right. The importance of filling it out accurately, and there's nothing wrong with and you know, there's a question on all of those. Would you reemploy the person?
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? Lie?
Yeah.
So
Yep. No,
that's why I think that when Shantae was talking about the HR people coming, they're just trying to kind of simmer you down from saying too much. But you
protect
can,
you from yourself.
yeah. But you can tell the truth.
Yeah, you can. Now, I did another reference today. I did a job reference through Apple Track. I do those 2 or 3 every day. I did one for Steve today for his program. And so all the folks that I have that matriculate to him, a lot of them will have me do their reference. And it's very simple in that, you know, I check all the boxes, but it gives me a box down at the bottom. And it also asks me, you know, at what level I recommend them. I mean, you know, I could say, you know, he's, you know, smart, good, all that. But down the bottom, it always, you know, and he's, you know, smart enough to realize to look and see what it says down at the bottom. You know, if it says, you know, recommend with reservation, don't, you know, that's not actionable legally against me. That would mean that's me waving the flag saying no. Or I'll say in the box, take this one. Yeah. And, you know, his or her, you know, dispositionals might not be the greatest, but yeah, you want this one, or, you know, if I leave that box blank, that means, you know, you might as well just light yourself on fire rather than take this one. And so, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. And Steve knows that. He's figured it out. He just flips to the bottom of those recommendations and look and say yeah or no, or yay or nay. And part of it too is just like with him. So I was talking about, you can call people and you can talk with people, and you can get a sense of how things are going, but on those things. And so yes, I mean, you have a way to tell the truth without it being actionable against you. But as Steve is talking about, we got to quit passing the trash. I'll give you where we're making these deals. If you'll resign quietly and leave, I'll give you a good record. No, we can't do that, because they're not going to change. I mean, I had a football coach, and, you know, I would, you know, I think of, he was a pretend history teacher and football coach, and I got rid of him, and I put a hold so that if he ever tried to come back to the district, that he would, the person, you know, would have to call me that wanted to hire him. And so a few years later, the principal at East Met called me and said, you know, and I said, now, you know, you might win a few ball games, but I said, it won't be but a year or two. He'll cheat and you'll be in trouble and have to forfeit all your games. He said, well, I'm retiring anyway. I just wanted to have a winning season. I said, well, that's up to you. I mean, you can have those critical conversations with people, and you should. But again, your HR folks, Shantae, are just trying to keep you, kind of save you from yourself, and don't want you to get into something actionable where somebody can sue you. And they don't want to have the district be sued, even if they think they can win, because that's quite expensive. So let's move on. We've talked about intervention. We're gonna hit on that one real big on our last case study, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. Please remember that don't volunteer. If you don't teach a kid, don't volunteer to go into an IEP meeting. That can be a FERPA violation if you don't teach that child, if you don't have any standing. That's one of the things that we kind of do and get away with that we got to quit doing. If you don't teach that child, you shouldn't be in his IEP meeting. The other is know what your intervention is at your school and school district. Question?
Dr. Lamb, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What's the most respectful way? I know you said that last time and it shocked me because I've sat in more IEP meetings that are kids that are not pertaining to me. What's the most respectful way to tell your admin? Because we're not telling classroom teachers this, you're telling administration, no, that's not my kid. I'm sorry, I can't sit in on that meeting. What's the most respectful way to say that? You personally,
most respectful way is that you've now learned what FERPA is, and that you have, that you're concerned about your legal liability. That information is being shared with you that you have no right to hear, and that puts you in a bad situation. They'll sue you, not the school. They'll sue you because you had no standing in that case. The liability will come back to you. And so that's what I would say is now that I know about FERPA and I don't know anything about, I don't really have anything to add because I don't teach this kid. I mean, what's the purpose of me being in there? I don't teach this kid. I can't help. I don't have any knowledge. I can't help with the anecdotals or any of that 30-day stuff. Why should I, what benefit are you gaining from me being in there? And you're exposing me to a lot of liability, by federal privacy law.
So when they ask us to sit in, I've sat in on a few I've sat in on a meeting for an autistic student who they needed a regular ed teacher in the meeting. And I guess they were talking about what they do in like the K2 AU classes compared to regular ed and my expectations. Now, would that be different because I'm talking to a parent about regular ed things, but I'm not sitting in because the teacher is absent. So I'm not sitting in because his actual classroom teacher is absent. So in her absence, they need another kindergarten teacher there. So I'm sitting in for that meeting. That's two different.
But
right?
What you would do in that case is you would tell your part, then you would be excused.
Okay.
Before they started talking about that individual child. See, that's the part where it gets really hinky and where you get in trouble is when they start talking about the child and their behaviors or their achievement or whatever. You're not really privy to that information. If they had you in as kind of a expert witness on what goes on in a normal K2 class, you'd come in and say, all right, this is what I do. And then they'd say, well, thank you, Miss Hinkle, and then off you'd go. But you shouldn't be there when they talk about the kid. That's kind of the delineation. Yes, ma'am.
So my question to that now is, what if the EC, the person in charge, their stance is, but we are pulling you in because again, they can't find anybody at that time.
They can reschedule.
And you taught the kid before.
No.
Because I had that struggle this week and it almost got to admin because I said no and it was like a back and forth email going on. And I was like, I'm not teaching the kid.
No, that's a no. Hold your ground on that one. Now, full disclosure, my sidekick in my Monday night class does this for the district in Lincoln County. And one of the things that he continually reminds our students, and I remember these are first level master students, they don't know a whole lot. And so they're good. They're good young people. They're going to be good, but they're struggling just, some days to find the building because they're so green and young. But Josh reminded them again last night you can reschedule these meetings, and the people that scheduled them can reschedule them. Don't you get yourself in a situation where you are now liable for your behavior. Don't do that. These meetings can be canceled. They can be rescheduled.
And
That is the answer is, oh, if you don't come in, we don't have a regular ed teacher in here, we'll have to reschedule. Well, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to reschedule. And you know, I'm just telling you, you can't, folks, you can't fall in this trap. The liability is just too great.
And Baleen, the person in charge is the LEA person that's there at the meeting. It's not the EC teacher. So you can refer to what the LEA
Exactly.
do.
But the learning piece for us as well is when you become an AP, you're probably going to be that LEA rep as its representative that actually schedules and manages that meeting. The point is, don't just be pulling people in off the street. If you don't have the appropriate people there, reschedule and get the appropriate people there. Don't just be grabbing whoever's handy. That is a violation of federal law. And again, you know how it always goes. It's all fun and games till somebody gets their eye put out, till a decision comes down that parents aren't happy with, and then they'll grasp whatever stick you left laying around. They'll pick it up and beat you with it. You know, they might beat you, but never give people the stick. And knowing that you walked into a meeting with people who weren't supposed to be there is never a good idea. That will go badly.
Does everybody still, I mean, everybody in the IEP meeting, they all still sign the IEP, don't they?
Well, it's weird. Like I stopped signing papers ever since COVID.
Okay,
I
so
don't
we
know
don't
what
do
the-
that anymore.
Well, that's strange. Like you would think that that's legal.
I mean, it's a contract, so I was just, that would be the other concern is
That's
that since Shantae brought it up, that she's signing a contract about a kid she doesn't even know. And that can come back because I mean, when the IEP doesn't work is when the lawsuit comes.
That's exactly right.
And your name is on there as well. So it's there are a lot of safeguards that you need to put into play to protect yourself, but the district needs to protect as well.
Exactly.
I don't know, Jessica, if I mean, I understand not passing a pen around during COVID, you know, we were all careful about that, but
yes, but everybody still has to sign that's in the meeting. Everybody that's in the meeting still has to sign. And
it's a physical paper too. So like I've recently signed the physical paper, and I remember the student that I wasn't supposed to be in there on, they had already put my name down there like classroom teacher, and I signed it. I feel so terrible now, but I mean, I didn't know, but now
I personally hope you can't sleep well tonight.
And I'll take the day off and come to your house.
I thought Lutherans were a lot more humanistic than that. That was pretty ugly, wasn't it? That sounded like something a Baptist would say.
Well, you know, in being saved by grace, I'm just going to say, Shantae, it's okay. If it means you're coming over here, it's okay that you did that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about discipline. We'll get to bullying, harassment, as I said, we'll do that last. Let's talk about discipline. So what did you find out when you went out and talked to folks who were doing discipline? Takes a lot of time, doesn't it? That dang due process is just awful, isn't it? Just wears you out, just makes you have to get witness statements and talk to kids and let them give their side of the story. Man, I tell you, that due process just takes forever. You know, if we could just run them through like cattle, boy, discipline would go a whole lot faster. Yes, Mandy.
So I was talking to my principal about it, and he goes, "Let me tell you a story. This just happened." He said a parent called or something happened, and I think there was a a fight or something, and it was in the bathrooms because isn't that where all fights take place? At least at my school, is we had
Yeah.
fight club in the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Kind of like, if you don't let your kids ride the school bus out, they're going to learn about sex. Well, how they
right.
going to learn to fight if you don't let them go to the bathroom?
That's right. So he said, I interviewed like 16 kids, and every kid said the exact same thing. Their stories all lined up. He said, so I closed the case. The parent called back and said, what, wait a minute. So he said, I talked to a 17th and 18th kid, and the 18th kid is the kid who said, oh, there was a text message group that was sent around that said, this is what you've got to say. And so every one of those kids, he said, really, I mean, you think with 17 kids,
Yeah.
you got it solved. And he goes, no, it took me till the 18th kid to get this one straightened out. He said it was the biggest hoorah, but yeah, they're so smart.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot do discipline in a hurry. I've only got a minute. Let me process this one real fast. No, it takes forever. Kids are smart. They communicate. They do text messages. They just know. I mean, my story this week is WhatsApp. Has anybody seen the new WhatsApp commercial? WhatsApp is it's like a personal private Twitter group that you have. Facebook's bought them out now, but I've had an account forever. Even back to the days when it was free and then when it was $1, but now Facebook's bought it. I don't know what they're charging us for it now, but I'm, part of a WhatsApp group. And so, there's been commercial on lately. I don't know if y'all watch, I don't know what I was watching. I think it was the World Series. This app where these people go into this like a FedEx or a store to send a message, and the guy gets a pigeon, and the pigeon's name is Layla, and they're like, yeah, oh my God, you can tell it's put on, but they're like, oh my God, and he said, well, this is as secure as text messages. SMX messages are unencrypted and they're not secure, and you need to send your stuff by WhatsApp, which is an app on your phone. I've got it. So guess what happened yesterday? My WhatsApp, after that commercial night before last, my WhatsApp account got hacked yesterday. And so my point is, nothing is secure. Kids can get into anything. They know how to send. I mean, it's amazing what they know. And it makes discipline, you're exactly right, Mandy. It makes discipline even harder because they get their story straight. They all get on the same narrative, but you've got it. Discipline takes forever, but you can't rush it, because you get it wrong, it'll come back to get you. Or if you don't, uphold the rights of all your kids. And so discipline takes forever. It's not something that you do in a minute. You've got to know the state manual on reporting. You've got to know your local. And the last thing that we've not really mentioned this semester, because everybody thinks I'm anti-teacher anyway, you've got to work with your teachers for consistency in referrals. That's the piece of it that we don't talk about enough. And the truth of the matter is, we've got to teach teachers how to do referrals and what needs to be in the referral. Their written statements. Don't be making statements like, this kid's a pain in my behind every day. Don't lead out with that. That's probably not good. That shows that you're prejudicial against that kid already. You got to teach teachers, this is the code of conduct. These are the things you need to handle in your building, in your room. These are the things that need to come to me. When they come to me, this is the way it needs to be. I need a clear written statement about what this kid did. You've got to work with your teachers as an assistant principal who processes discipline. You've got to work with them. One of the things is consistency. I mean, in any building, you've got some teachers that, I'll just tell you, I taught high school, and Annie knows where I taught. I taught the old Central High School. You know how many kids I took to the office in 5 years of teaching? I took 2. And full disclosure, they weren't mine. I found these 2 boys out. I think it was one of the McDaniel brothers. 2 boys was out fighting. And the only reason I took them, one of them had fallen and hit his head on a low stone wall and was bleeding. I thought he was going to bleed out. And so I rounded both of them up and took them to the office. That's the only 2 I took the whole time I taught school. That was the only discipline referral I ever did, was I found 2 boys out fighting and carried them to that. In 5 years at that school I taught there. Now, there were some people that their students were on the bench outside of the office every day. I mean, they had to get a second bench for some students. I mean, they did referrals of kids every day. Somewhere in between, probably I should have referred somewhere along the way, but you know, hey, I figured you hired me to do this, I'll take care of it. And then on the other end, you have people that this ain't my job. I don't do this, and everything that a kid does. But you've got to work with your teachers to find, you know, that medium of what a referral to the office is and what it looks like when I get it. We're not saying you can't send referrals, but you can't just send a kid down here. Well, what'd you do? Well, I don't know. He just sent me. You have to work that process as well. And a good due process case starts with that written referral from that teacher. You can't ever forget that. If you don't have that, it's not going to go well for you. Processing discipline. Thoughts about processing discipline. What did you learn when you talked to your administrators about doing that? What sense did you get? Did you walk away with that?
So at South, when I went to South, even though it's still CMS, it was a different transition from where I was before, where it was encouraged to document more when I got to South than where I was before.
Yeah.
Before, if you document, you were seen as a weak teacher. At South, they ask you to please document, and then in the handbook, you have minor offenses. You have the tiers.
Yeah.
So the handbook has the tiers.
Yeah.
And it's just a track record to say, okay, this is what was happening, and this is what I did.
Yes.
So even if you call for security, which they are very, very quick, they get there immediately. They take every case seriously at South. The first thing as they come to your door, they're going to say, did you put it in educator's handbook? Before they even walk away, they ask you that, because by the time they get to the office, the child is going to change your story about 10 times.
Yeah.
So put it in, pause for a second, put it in immediately, so that when we take the child to the office, we can pull up, if you have evidence, put the evidence there and everything, and make sure parent is contacted. So they are very, very good for that. So when we were having that conversation, I could agree with the admin, because I've seen it on the teacher's perspective, where they are very, very good when it comes to following through with the process. The only thing though is they're still working on their intervention team. So because they have changed a lot of leadership, they're trying to fit the right people into the right spots to make sure everybody is doing what they need to do. Every Monday, all admins meet and they do a waterfall with sticky notes, as in what happened, what are we going to do this week, and all of that. And they're making sure that every admin is saying the same thing. So you're not going to give Johnny one, his punishment is going to be one thing, and then somebody else, because this person is on the soccer team, their punishment is lighter for the same thing. Or the reverse, this person's reward is this, while this person's reward is that. So they have been really, really working on that piece. And I really admire that.
Yeah. What are those 2 standards? When you give too much punishment for a crime, what's that called? What are our 2 disciplinary standards under the law? What is it when you give too much punishment for that it doesn't finish to fit the crime? That's called capricious, right? And what's the standard when you punish one but not the other? What's that called?
Arbitrary.
That's arbitrary. So those are the 2 standards. So what Valine is saying is her school is working really hard to avoid arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary is, especially if you have multiple people processing discipline, it gets really bad. It becomes more arbitrary, and you have less inter-rater reliability. Do you remember back to the course that you had on research when we talk about inter-rater reliability? You folks are instructional supervision and instructional evaluation experts. What do you work on in terms of consistency when you go in and see a lesson? Don't you work on inter-rater reliability, that everybody that sees that same lesson would give it the same score? Isn't that important in your line of work? Well, of course it is. It's the most important thing. Well, in our line of work on operations, it's the same thing. We got to be consistent that this is handled the same way, regardless of who the kid is or who's processing, which of the 5 or 6 APs of process and discipline shouldn't matter. Now, I'm not surprised to hear this from the lean. Full disclosure, I did not ruin her principal, but I trained him when he was a young AP at Wilson Middle School, by the way. And he has, it didn't kill him. See, he survived me. That's a long time ago. He was a young man then. I think he was still wearing short pants. I believe he still had a milk mustache. He was so young back then. But the notion here is, these are things that you got to learn how to do discipline, and you don't ever change that in terms of you never shortcut it. You never say, well, I'm at an easy building now, or these kids are better kids and we're out. The process has to be the same for every kid every day. That's the notion. And trust me, Mark had plenty of business when he was at Wilson. But hopefully it sounds like he learned the right things. I've kept up with him over the years, and I know he has. But I claim no credit for that. He took it seriously when he was, when he got his first AP job, he worked very hard to learn, and he understood how important it was to do that. It sets a culture for your entire building. In terms of that, we're going to be on the up and up for everybody. Steve, you have something you'd like to say on discipline before we move on?
Consistency. That's, I think that Dale has used the terms arbitrary and capricious, I think, each week since he's taken over this. And, it is difficult for any parent to have an open mind when you're talking about their child. So your ability to have thoroughly investigated and been consistent in how you handle disciplinary things is critical in the eyes of your community, and it is even more so in the eyes of your faculty. And just because Steve sends more problems to Dale than Jessica does, doesn't mean that I'm gonna, punish the child more for one or the other. But I can think back to when I was a young principal, and if Jessica never sends somebody to the office, and then all of a sudden she sends one for whatever offense, and I punish that child for that offense more than I've punished any other child for the same offense, just because Jessica sent them, then I've got a problem. And that's not fair to the child. And so, but I can remember using the line, Jessica sends you, then you did something bad wrong. Well,
Yeah.
The truth is, Jessica just may have had so much on her plate that day that it just touched a nerve. And so we've got to be consistent with it. But I think that's life, isn't it? I mean, being consistent in life is an important thing. Mm-hmm. Unless you're consistently bad.
So my final to you is discipline is not plug and play. It's not that simple. Know that it's going to be a big part of your life as a young AP, and embrace that and do it the right way, and you will be fine. I want to talk about this one, the field trip. We talked about it, called the law. But let's review quickly our standards. Since 1992, school administrators can be held liable, tort liable, for for actions that happen in their building. That means that they can be financial. That's what I'm talking about. You know, trying to keep you from losing your house here. You can be sued personally, individually, not just the district. There's 3 standards of negligence, and we have to make sure that we understand each of those fully. We use the field trip, call the police. You have a duty or responsibility to call for emergency personnel. You're not a medical doctor. So the 3 standards of negligence are misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance. Which of those 3 would you be guilty of if you had a duty to call the emergency personnel, 911, and you didn't, because you didn't think it was warranted, or you thought it would be a public relations issue, and you did not call 911 at a bus wreck? Which of those would that be? Would that be misfeasance, malfeasance, or nonfeasance? You had a duty to act and didn't. That would be nonfeasance. That would be nonfeasance. You had a duty to act and you didn't do anything. All right. What is misfeasance? That means you did the wrong thing. You didn't know it was wrong, but you did it anyway. You can be held liable for that. And then malfeasance is you did the wrong thing knowing it was the wrong thing. You were just mad and did it anyway. And so we have this notion that, as long as I was pure, as long as, I didn't think anybody was hurt, so I'm in the clear. No, you had a duty to act. Law is very clear. There's no such thing as a minor bus accident. You have a bus accident, you call the police. It's just that clear. It's kind of like, what's the definition of a mild heart attack or a minor heart attack? That's when somebody else has one. There is no such thing as a minor heart attack. That's the same way with the bus wreck. There is no minor bus wreck, because that somebody's kids are on there, and they'll lose their grip if something turns out later on that kid was hurt, or even if they just imagine it, they're hurt. So most folks know if something goes bad, and you did it intentionally, did a bad thing, that you'd be liable. Or if you did something you didn't know it was the wrong thing, but it turned out and things went bad. But what folks have the hardest time understanding is if you had a duty to act and didn't, that's still actionable against you. Well, I didn't know those kids were hurt, or I didn't think they were, or that those people are just making that up. There wasn't anything wrong with them. If you have a duty to act and don't, then you're going to be negligent. You got to understand that. And so that leads me to our last one, which is sexual harassment, sexual assault, those things. You have a duty to act, but a lot of people don't want to. We want to handle that in-house. We don't want the negative publicity. We want to conduct our own investigation. You need to call the police. You are not qualified to do that investigation of a sexual nature. They are way too complex for people unless they've been trained to do that. Most school districts either have somebody on their police staff, or they have somebody in the local police department that do those investigations. You are not that person. You can't get involved in covering up all this sexual stuff that's going on now. It's just too much. You cannot be involved in that. So to kind of close out the evening, I'll share my screen. I have this, it's under tonight's lesson, and it's assistant principal accused of not reporting student sexual abuse appears in court. This person ended up getting 4 years hard time. We could pull one up every week. I just happen to have this one right here. Not only did this AP refused to investigate, refused to listen to the girl's report, also made the student apologize to her abuser and give him a hug at the end of the disciplinary section. I've told you the story of one of the high schools in CMS had to let the entire administrative team go. They punished the girl. They gave her a punishment to try to keep her quiet. That stuff's got to quit, folks. We got to clean this stuff up. this failure to act, this, if I ignore it, it'll go away. I don't have to tell anybody if I say nothing happened, nothing happened. Again, that goes back to nonfeasance. You had a duty to act and didn't. We know that we have to report all this stuff, that we have to deal with it. Is it unpleasant? Yes. Is it a bad look? Yes. Is it a public relations nightmare? Yes. But you got to deal with it anyway. Now, Steve's going to tell you how Gaston County dealt with one, and it's not laughable, folks. I'm not that, but there was a case in Gaston County, and he's going to tell you how Gaston went about, which I thought was pretty intelligent. So Steve's going to close us out tonight.
So this is the AP one?
Yes. The Star.
Yeah. So there was the Gaston people know about this.
Yes.
This story, but the issue was this inappropriate relationship was going on, and what my story is that I brought the newspaper, the Gaston Gazette. Dale and I were doing a Saturday class, and I brought the Saturday edition that was the headline of the inappropriate relationship. And I said, what stands out about this? And we've talked about this in here before. And what stands out about this is Saturday news doesn't get the same play as during the week news. And I know we've mentioned this before. It is important. I mean, obviously, you're not going to put anybody in jeopardy. The employee was not at work. They'd already taken care of the employee would not be at work. But getting it into the news cycle on a Saturday is important. Now, the critic would say that's just not good. You need to be up front and let the news play out the day it occurs. What we need to remember is if it can be delayed to Saturday or Sunday, then by Monday, something else has happened, and it's not the talk of the school. It disrupts the whole school. And so that was the learning piece from that that is more of a central office thing, because they're the ones that handle the news cycle and what is shared with the news media. You as the principal want to work with your district office on how are we going to portray this so that our community trusts us. By doing it on a Saturday morning when the news cycle's out, the principal had time then to write a letter or to the parents to say, here's what happened, here's how we've handled it. You need to know that your child is safe at this school. Now, every parent's not going to believe that, but it does give you as the leader of the school a chance to calm the fears of, this is going on. This was a school-based administrator. I am sure that there were parents to say, how did you not know as principal that your AP was having an inappropriate relationship? So that's the kind of thing that we need to play through to make sure that we are communicating safety first, and that we're in charge of our schools. And I think that in that case, being able to delay the news cycle, not allowing the person to go back to work until the news cycle hit, but allowing all of that to occur so that it happened on Friday afternoon. All the arrest was on Friday afternoon, so that it was news on Saturday morning, or news on Channel 3 and Channel 9, Channel 36, and Channel whatever else, 46. That they at 11 o'clock that night, most people were more interested in what the football scores were. Mm-hmm. So it is the timing of sharing things is important. I think that's what Dale was getting at there. But that is where you as the principal work with your district office to be able to communicate. You're going to have to be the upfront person on some bad news.
Yep.
And whether it's guns on campus or inappropriate relationships with faculty and students, or students misbehaving themselves, you're going to have to be able to communicate with your parents and say, here's how we're keeping your child safe at this school, without being, too forthcoming on a particular person, because you can't.
But the notion here, and thank you, Steve, that was perfect. The notion here is you're gonna have to take your lumps, folks. When things go bad, that's what they pay you for. Stand out front, and you're gonna have to take some of that with it. There's ways to mitigate it, as Steve said. You work your central office, but the way not to mitigate it, the bad example is to hide it. I don't want to take that whipping. That's your job. And Steve knew the principal at that building, and I'd met her maybe once or twice in my career, but he knew her. That doesn't mean that she's a bad person. Bad things happen, to good people, but you got to stand up and be counted. You can't say, for my own career or my own PR, or I don't want to face this. That's not acceptable. What we do is we stand up, and when it's our turn to take the whipping, we stand up and take it. That's what we have to do. And because people are so afraid of that, or they're afraid of the negative publicity or whatever, the news cycle, they cover things up. They don't report, they underreport, they mitigate, they get cold feet, they reconsider. Folks, you have a duty to act to keep kids safe. You shouldn't be doing malpractice. You shouldn't intentionally harm kids. And you can't just say, well, I'm not going to deal with that. Hopefully it'll go away. That's not what we do as leaders. That's what we can't be doing that. We've had a great time with these classes on Tuesday nights. I've enjoyed these tremendously. We're going to have a big bunch of biscuits on Saturday. The good news for Saturday is Steve won't be with us. I don't know. He's a bigger name on the other line. He's doing something else, but I'll be with you on Saturday. We'll have biscuits and coffee. We'll have pastries, whatever you want, but we'll have a big time. And remember, Saturday is your day. You're going to get up and you're going to present, and I'll probably poke fun at you and aggravate you a little bit, but Saturday's your day. I want you to remember that the reason why we're doing this is this, work on your ability to lead a faculty, to get up and command a room for a faculty. And you're the expert. So I'm really looking forward to our presentations on Saturday. And then Steve will join us again on Sunday. Please remember, Sunday is TD Jake Sunday. That is a very powerful message that we all need to hear on a regular basis, and I'm looking forward to that. So Steve, you have anything at the benediction tonight you'd like to add?
Well, I just want you to know, because tonight, for the first time in a while, I beat you online, and there were
Yes.
3 others that were already online when I joined, and they were very emotional because they realized this was the last Zoom. And I tried to calm them and say, it's okay. Life goes on. It'll be okay. So you all are going to have a great time Saturday. They'll have, it is neat to talk about these case studies, and you get into probing questions, and you will have a really neat day on Saturday. And then Sunday is a special day. Bishop Jake's sermon is a lengthy sermon, unlike a Lutheran sermon. And so we will, it's an hour and a half. So we will enjoy eating together and watching the sermon. And then afterward, we will have what I believe, because it always has been this way, Dale, hasn't it? A rich conversation about what we learned together from what Bishop Jakes is talking about, relating it to your respective roles in your schools and leadership opportunities you've had, and even what you think is forthcoming in the coming years. So we'll have a great weekend. It's a full moon tonight. I'm sorry for all of you having to work tomorrow, because that means the kids will be wild, right? But boy, when that moon was coming over the horizon tonight, it was awesome. Big old moon. So that's all I got.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
We'll see y'all on Saturday morning.
I have a quick question.
All righty.
The email that came on